Walter Grady, 66, was a fixture on the edge of Brooklyn's rhythm, homeless for over a decade, known by his silence, remembered by no one. He moved like smoke through alleyways and storefront shadows, a ghost with tired feet and a spine once trained to salute. The locals saw him. They didn't always look at him, but they saw him. The way he carried an old military backpack with its faded green canvas and peeling name tag. The way he never begged, only nodded when someone offered a meal, and never took more than he needed. Each day began the same. He rose with the streetlights still humming, brushed snow or dust from the blanket he used the night before, and made his way to the corner where recycling bins overflowed. The clinking of glass bottles became his morning bell. He moved slow but steady, his joints stiff, his breath always a little shallow from winters spent breathing air thick with exhaust and regret. Most walked past him without speaking. But some, the ones who worked double shifts and remembered harder times, sometimes left a sandwich on the ledge beside him. Others, mostly restaurant workers closing down for the night, offered half-filled containers wrapped in foil. Walter always accepted with a quiet nod and eyes that said more than words ever could. He never overstayed. Never caused a scene. It was as if he carried the discipline of a life long gone into the chaos of his present. Few people knew his past. Fewer cared to ask. Walter had been someone once. A staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. He had served 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. His record showed valor, quiet leadership, a man who never raised his voice but whom others followed without hesitation. He had medals, some in boxes, some in drawers, and one, the Bronze Star, buried in the pocket of a jacket now long lost to time. He had a wife, too. Margaret. She had taught piano to children and never missed a Sunday at church. Cancer took her slowly. The VA hospital had dismissed the early signs. A misdiagnosis. A foreman signed. A call not returned. By the time they caught it, it had already spread. Walter never forgave the silence that followed. Not from the doctors. Not from the government. Not from God. He sold everything after her funeral. Their modest apartment in Flatbush. Her piano. Even the old Buick they used to drive out to the Catskill LLS in the fall. Then he vanished. Not to punish anyone, but because there was nowhere else left to go. Sometimes it's easier to be nobody than to be somebody who failed the person they loved most, he told a soup kitchen volunteer once. The woman cried. He never returned. On a morning in late November, cold enough to stiffen breath and turn hands to stone, Walter turned onto 3rd and saw the boy. Thin, maybe 10 years old. Face raw from windburn. Socks gray with dirt. No shoes. He sat on the steps of a closed pharmacy, knees to his chest, arms wrapped tight. His eyes didn't scan the street. They simply stared forward, as if bracing for whatever would come next. Walter recognized the look. Hunger that wrapped around you like a second skin. Not loud, not desperate, just there. Walter paused. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His stomach growled with the steady ache of someone who had taught his body how to be quiet. He had just returned bottles at the corner bodega. $8.45. Enough for a sandwich and a coffee if he went to the right place. Enough to get him through another day. But he didn't keep it. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle the boy. Reached into his coat. Pulled out a single dollar. His last one. Folded twice, worn soft from being kept and not spent. He held it out. The boy didn't move at first. But when Walter nodded once, barely, the boy reached out, took the dollar with a trembling hand, and ran. No words. Just motion. Walter watched him go. It wasn't much. But sometimes, the smallest acts are the loudest prayers. Later that afternoon, the cold deepened. Walter's fingers were blue at the edges. His breath came slower. He passed Morelli's Corner Market and paused, not because he wanted to, but because his legs didn't want to carry him further. Inside, the warm lights made the bread look golden. It had been 3 days since he'd last eaten. The loaf sat in the discount bin. Day old. Marked down. He looked around. Mr. Morelli was at the front, helping a customer count out coins. Walter slipped it into his coat. Slowly. Carefully. He didn't get far. "Hey! Stop right there!" Mr. Morelli shouted, eyes locking onto the old man through the security mirror. "I'm calling the cops." Walter didn't run. He didn't even move. He just stood there, the loaf still half visible in his coat, his breath heavy from the cold. "I just needed strength to live one more day," he said softly, though no one was listening. The police arrived quickly. 2 officers. One young, the other older. The younger one, Jenkins, hesitated when he saw Walter's face. Saw the dog tags beneath his collar. "You really a vet?" he asked. Walter nodded. "I used to be someone useful." "Not anymore." They placed the cuffs on anyway. It was protocol. The market was pressing charges. Prior offenses had been logged: petty theft, trespassing, sleeping in public spaces. A pattern. Nothing violent. Nothing malicious. Just survival. The older officer offered him a coat for the ride. At the precinct, Walter sat in holding for hours. No calls were made. No one was waiting. His assigned public defender didn't meet his eye. Just handed him a form to sign and left with a shrug. Court was scheduled for the next morning. A minor theft. A homeless repeat offender. No one expected anything more. But justice, like memory, sometimes has a longer reach than anyone imagines. The courtroom buzzed with the muted energy of routine. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale shadows on rows of tired faces. Lawyers shuffled papers, court clerks called case numbers like grocery orders, and board officers leaned on walls, waiting for trouble that never came. It was the kind of place where names blurred and justice ran on autopilot, until it didn't. Walter Grady sat at the defense table, hands folded, posture straight. He still wore the wrinkled coat from the day before. The loaf of bread had long since been logged into evidence. No family sat behind him. No friends. Just a hum of disinterest. The judge's nameplate read Michael Carmichael. Stern. Efficient. Known for moving his docket quickly, without nonsense or sentiment. He looked down at Walter's file as the court clerk droned, case number 47,293. State versus Walter Edward Grady. The young prosecutor stood. Polished. Eager. Already rehearsing his lines. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended stealing food from a local business. Given his prior offenses, unstable housing status, and previous citations for loitering and trespassing, we recommend pretrial detention." The judge didn't respond. He flipped through the file. "Walter Edward Grady," he repeated, slowly. There was a pause. Something shifted in his eyes. His hand gripped the edge of the bench just a bit tighter. He looked again, from the page to the man. The name had struck something. A long-forgotten thread tugged at the back of his mind. Walter said nothing. He didn't recognize the judge. Why would he? Judges came and went. He had stopped expecting fairness long ago. But Judge Carmichael stood. It was a small movement, and yet, in that courtroom, it echoed like thunder. Judges didn't stand during routine arraignments. "We'll take a short recess," he announced abruptly. 15 minutes. Whispers bloomed like smoke across the room. The bailiff looked confused. The prosecutor sat down, blinking. In his chambers, Judge Carmichael pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. A worn photo lay inside, curled at the edges from time and memory. A younger version of himself stared back, in uniform, surrounded by a unit of soldiers in desert fatigues. He hadn't looked at the photo in years. There, at the back row, standing tall, Walter Grady. The judge sat back hard in his chair. The mission came flooding back. Fallujah, 2003. An ambush. Smoke, screams, chaos. A supply truck burning. And the moment someone, he hadn't remembered who, dragged him from the wreckage and carried him through 2 miles of fire and broken ground. Walter. It had been Walter Grady. He opened his laptop and typed fast, pulling up the military database. The service record confirmed it all. 3 tours. Bronze Star. Commendation for bravery. Staff Sergeant. Honorably discharged. But what struck him most wasn't the awards, it was the silence after them. Nothing from 2008 onward. Just disappearance. No pension withdrawals. No forwarding address. Just a final note in the file, spouse deceased. No response from next of kin. 15 minutes later, the judge re-entered the courtroom. This time, his eyes didn't scan papers. They looked directly at Walter. Mr. Grady, he said slowly, as though relearning the shape of the name, do you wish to make a statement before I pass judgment? Walter blinked. No one had asked him that in years. I needed food, he said simply. I gave my last dollar to a boy with no shoes. Then I got hungry. That's all. No justification. No pity. Just truth, spoken plainly. The courtroom was silent. The prosecutor cleared his throat, unsure how to proceed. The judge raised his hand slightly, a signal that no one else would speak. I was saved by a man in my unit once, the judge said, his voice steady but low. He carried me through smoke and fire when I couldn't walk. He didn't ask if I was worth saving. The words hung heavy. The people in the courtroom leaned in without meaning to. That man, the judge continued, was Walter Grady. A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Someone whispered "My God" under their breath. Judge Carmichael exhaled through his nose, steadied himself. The court is dismissing all charges. Mr. Grady, you are free to go. Gasps. Murmurs. The prosecutor sat back in disbelief. The judge stood once more. This time not in surprise, but in solemnity. But before you do, he said, I'd like to make something clear. The word vagrant was used in this case file. I find that term insufficient. Mr. Grady is not a vagrant. He is a veteran. A protector. And today, he reminded us that integrity doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in action, not appearance. There was no applause. Just silence. A kind of reverent, breathless silence that filled every space like water. Walter stood, slowly. His joints cracked. He nodded once, not to the judge, but to the memory of a battlefield long behind them both. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had begged *N to gather. Word had spread from the courtroom, whispered first by a clerk, then tweeted by a journalist sitting in the back row. A man who once saved 17 soldiers had stood trial for stealing bread. And the judge he saved had set him free. Someone had already found an old army photo online and posted it. The comments poured in, some outraged, some heartbroken. Most simply stunned. A local cafe owner reposted the image with the caption, "This man once protected strangers. Maybe now we protect him." That afternoon, Walter returned to the street. Same coat. Same backpack. But the stares were different now. Less wary. More curious. One man offered him coffee. Another gave him a pair of winter gloves. He accepted both, unsure why. He returned to his usual bench. Sat down. Exhaled. A little boy passed by with a familiar face, the same boy from the pharmacy steps. He was wearing new shoes. Their eyes met, just for a moment. The boy nodded once. Walter nodded back. Walter Grady did not seek out the attention that followed. He never had. Fame made him uncomfortable. Charity even more so. He was used to moving silently through the city, through his thoughts, through the invisible cracks of a society that preferred its heroes spotless and housed. But now, people noticed. That was new. Some recognized him from the photo, others from the court report that had gone viral overnight. A former staff sergeant, tried for stealing a loaf of bread, released by the very judge whose life he had once saved in a place thousands of miles away. Still, Walter's routine remained the same. He returned to the park benches and church steps he trusted, nodded to the bakery worker who now gave him fresh rolls instead of day-old leftovers, and spent evenings at the soup kitchen without asking for more than one bowl. But the city had changed around him. Strangers began to pause longer before passing. A barista left a cup of coffee near his usual stoop. A high school student dropped off a winter coat that looked too expensive to be second-hand. Someone else, he never saw who, left a fresh blanket folded beside his bag, wrapped in plastic, with a note pinned to the top, "Thank you for carrying more than your weight." Walter accepted everything with the quiet grace of someone who had lost much more than he'd ever asked for. Then came the next incident. It was 2 weeks after the courtroom dismissal. Snow had begun to dust the sidewalks. Walter had made a temporary camp in the alley beside Morelli's market, though he never went inside again. Pride was a quiet but constant companion. Late one night, headlights pierced the alley. A car rolled slowly past. Then it stopped. Voices erupted, slurred, angry, mean in the way only boredom and ignorance can be. Someone shouted, "Get a job, you filthy parasite," and a bottle crashed against the brick wall above Walter's head. It shattered. Liquid sprayed across his bag. Laughter followed. Then tires squealed, and the car disappeared into the dark. Walter didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he opened his pack, checked his few belongings for damage, and began cleaning the glass from the alley floor with a rag. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from cold and fatigue. Still, he worked quietly, wiping each shard into a paper bag. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply cleaned. Unseen from above, a young woman watched from her fire escape window. Sky Harper, 24, veterinary student and part-time night shift worker at a car wash, had noticed Walter for months, first from a distance, then more closely after the courtroom news spread online. She was the one who had posted his story in the first place. She had found the court filing through a friend, seen the photo, recognized the man from her own neighborhood, and decided people should know. But what she had just witnessed shook her deeply. Walter hadn't even flinched when they threw the bottle. He had responded with discipline. With composure. As though life owed him nothing more than the dignity of cleaning up after someone else's cruelty. Sky didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she returned to the alley with her camera. Not to film Walter directly, that felt wrong, but to capture the aftermath. The broken glass. The stained bricks. The way the alley looked more like a memorial than a crime scene. She uploaded the image to social media with a caption. He served 3 tours. He gave his last dollar to a child. And still, they throw bottles. Not because they know who he is, but because they don't care. Maybe now they will. The post took less than an hour to spread. People who had commented on the courtroom video now returned to add their voices again, this time louder. Veterans groups. Journalists. Elected officials. Someone even tagged the mayor. By noon, a petition had started, find Walter, offer him housing, honor his service. More than signatures, though, came the messages. Stories of other veterans forgotten in alleys. Letters from children who said they wanted to help. But Walter didn't know. He didn't check the internet. He didn't have a phone. It wasn't until a man in a dark overcoat approached him at the soup kitchen that he heard what had big asterisk in. "Mr. Grady," the man said gently, holding out a card. "My name is Marcus Leary. I work for the Office of Veterans Services. We've seen what happened. And, respectfully, sir, we believe it's time we honored you properly." Walter blinked. "I'm not looking for handouts," he said quietly. "This isn't a handout," the man replied. "It's a long overdue thank you." Walter hesitated. His fingers brushed the edge of the card. He took it. That evening, Sky returned from school to find a package outside her door. Inside was a folded flag, a handwritten note, and a photograph of Walter saluting, newly taken, freshly printed. The note read, "You reminded the world that kindness doesn't need an audience. Thank you for seeing what others looked past." Sky cried for the first time in weeks. The next day, a citywide fundraiser launched to support transitional housing for veterans. Walter's name was on the homepage. The mayor held a press conference, standing beside Judge Carmichael, announcing a new pilot program named Project Grady. Walter did not attend. He said he didn't need applause. He only needed a place to be useful again. That's when Sky made the offer. She had just moved into a new apartment with 2 rooms, too much space for one person, she admitted. If Walter wanted a room, rent-free, just until the snow passed, he didn't have to say yes. But she'd leave the key at the front desk. He didn't come the first day. Or the second. On the third morning, when Sky returned from work, she saw it, his backpack, resting quietly just inside the door. And beside it, placed on a folded towel, was the loaf of bread he had once taken. Now repurchased. Still warm. Walter hadn't knocked. He hadn't left a note. He had simply returned what the world thought he owed. The apartment was quiet. Walter never asked for more than he needed. He kept to the back room, tidy, disciplined. His bed was made each morning with military corners. His coat hung neatly by the door. The only sign of his presence was the faint scent of cedar from the soap Sky had left in the bathroom, and the low hum of a small radio he listened to at dawn, always the same station, always just above a whisper. Sky never questioned the silence. She understood it. Grief often moved like fog, present, unannounced, and gone before it could be explained. He joined her for breakfast once, on a Saturday. She made eggs. He peeled an orange and offered half without a word. It felt like a ritual. She didn't press him to talk. He didn't need to. Later that week, Walter walked to the community center near Fulton Street. He'd passed it hundreds of times over the years but never once stepped inside. A poster in the window read, "Veterans Bike Repair Program, Volunteers Needed." He studied it for a long moment. Then, quietly, he opened the door. The center director didn't recognize him at first. But when Walter wrote his name on the sign-in sheet, the reaction was immediate. They asked for a photo. He declined. They offered a plaque. He shook his head. What he asked for instead was simple. "Give me broken things. I know how to fix them." They did. Rusted bikes, small engines, lawnmowers that hadn't run since summer. Walter arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, tools in hand, already wearing gloves. The teens who showed up, most of them city kids on court-ordered volunteer shifts, called him Sergeant G. At first, they mocked his stiffness. Then they mimicked it. By the third week, they were arriving early. He showed them how to listen before tightening bolts. How to read damage before deciding how to repair it. He taught them that sometimes the hardest part of fixing anything was learning how it broke in the first place. One morning, a boy named Terrell brought in a battered BMX frame. "My uncle used to ride this before he got locked up," he said quietly. Walter took the frame without a word. 3 days later, the bike shined. Chain restored. Tires reinflated. Handlebar tape wrapped in perfect symmetry. Terrell didn't speak when he saw it. Just stared, tears forming. Walter patted the seat once. "Ride careful," he said, barely audible. The next week, Terrell showed up with 3 friends and 2 more broken bikes. Word spread. Project Grady became more than a program, it became a movement. Not just about Walter. About what he represented. About repair, not just of machines, but of memory. Of worth. Local businesses donated parts. A retired teacher offered bookkeeping help. Veterans from across the borough started stopping by just to talk. Some hadn't spoken to another soldier in years. One, a man named Hector, returned daily, just to sweep the garage floor. "Feels like duty again," he explained. "Like it matters." Then came the letter. Skye found it in the mailbox, stamped with a presidential seal. Walter read it once, folded it neatly, and slid it under his pillow. He never spoke of what it said. But from that day forward, he began wearing a clean white t-shirt under his coat, as if expecting to be seen. At the community center's winter banquet, they invited him to speak. He declined. But he stood at the back, watching the kids he had taught stand straighter, speak more clearly, laugh without looking over their shoulders. Skye gave a speech on his behalf. She spoke not of war, but of warmth. Not of medals, but of mornings when Walter quietly left fixed toasters on neighbors' steps. Of how a man who had lost everything could still give. Of how, sometimes, the most broken people repair others best. That night, as the snow thickened outside, Walter walked home alone. Skye returned later to find something new above the fireplace. A wooden frame. Inside it, the loaf of bread, preserved under glass. Below it, carved carefully into a small plaque, the words, "Dignity can't be stolen. Only returned." By spring, the mayor attended a ceremony outside the community center. A garden was planted in Walter's name. It wasn't large. A few benches. A tree. A bronze plate with his story engraved. Children played there now. Parents sat quietly. And veterans, who once walked in silence, found one another again. Walter never gave speeches, but his presence was requested often. School assemblies. Veteran events. One teacher said, just having him sit in the front row makes the students behave better. He smiled at that. He still walked the streets. Still wore the coat, even after the city offered him new ones. Said it kept his spine aligned. That was all he ever said. Then one morning, he didn't wake up. Skye found him peacefully resting in the chair by the window, radio still humming. On the table beside him, a folded napkin, a sharpened pencil, and the same card he'd received months ago from the Office of Veteran Services, its edges soft from handling. He was buried with full honors. Not because he asked for them, but because those who knew better demanded it. At the funeral, Judge Carmichael stood beside Skye. Terrell read a poem. The mayor wept. And when they lowered Walter's casket into the ground, a dozen boys from the bike program lined up in silence, each one carrying a wrench across his chest like a rifle. Skye placed a single slice of warm bread beside the headstone. Some wounds, she thought, are never meant to be healed, only carried. Some lives, never meant to be famous, only witnessed. And some men, like Walter Grady, never asked to be remembered, but change everything when they are. Kindness without question is enough.